please welcome to the stage the President and Chief Executive Officer for the Nuclear Energy Institute, Maria Korsnick.
You know, every year it's my pleasure to deliver the State of the Nuclear Energy Industry address, and this year is no different. We're at a crossroads, really, for both our industry and the planet. The climate crisis is no longer a vague theoretical discussion. Droughts, floods, and wildfires are intensifying. Power blackouts are becoming more common. And our adversaries are manipulating the world's fuel supply while they threaten the stability of electric grids and abuse their leverage over our allies. Thankfully, leaders at home and abroad have recognized that our response to the climate crisis is intrinsically tied to our electrical grid, our economy, and our energy security. We now have strong corporate commitments and policy goals to reduce our carbon emissions using every clean energy source at our disposal. We already know that nuclear energy is the most reliable, scalable, carbon-free option that we have. But if we are content with our current pace, these aggressive plans to decarbonize are going to remain just that, plans. We can't tinker around the edges. We need to have an honest look at what it takes to achieve the true deep decarbonization that the world desperately needs. We have to ask, if we were designing a low carbon energy system to be both reliable and affordable, what would it look like? Well, for a moment, I want us to imagine a future 30 years from now, after we've successfully built that system. In 30 years, the changing climate will have changed our way of life. Yes, we felt the ongoing consequences, but we heeded warnings from the UN and other leading experts, and we moved quickly to decarbonize our energy sector. We drastically reduced emissions and avoided a worst-case ecological disaster. And we did that by investing in every carbon-free source at our disposal, but especially nuclear energy. We invested heavily in next-generation technology, and we also preserved and expanded our existing nuclear capacity while preparing our supply chain to build at scale. In this clean energy future, hundreds of reactors, from the existing models that we have today to advanced reactors, both large and small, dot the landscape. They form the backbone of a stable electric grid that includes large shares of other carbon-free sources like wind, hydropower, and solar, alongside the latest in battery storage technology. This system is anchored by the strength and resilience of our current reactors. They eliminate energy-related air pollution and the illness and death that it causes. Nuclear reactors run uninterrupted every hour of every day, rain or shine. They only refuel once every few years, and they're far less prone to supply disruptions and price fluctuations than the coal and gas that they replaced. By mid-century, constructing and operating nuclear plants supports hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of good-paying jobs. And in this future, the United States is energy independent and exporting our technologies to allies and partners around the world. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Well, the fact is that is the right choice, and this future is within our grasp. If we make those choices today, then even the most doubtful voices will finally join the consensus of scientists and CEOs and heads of state, business leaders and economists around the world. Nuclear is the key to unlocking a zero-carbon future. You know, I spent a considerable part of the past year attending climate and energy conferences across the world, including COP26 in Glasgow. And everywhere I went, I saw a sea change in the perception of nuclear energy. It has steadily gained recognition as an indispensable tool for driving down emissions. And here in Washington, we've built a bipartisan coalition committed to that truth. Support for nuclear, well, it starts at the White House. In 2021, the Biden administration declared the next few years a can't-miss opportunity for nuclear. And U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm also called nuclear an absolutely critical part of the decarbonization equation. And at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, a bipartisan majority in Congress recognizes that the path to an affordable, carbon-free future runs through nuclear energy, maintaining our current fleet as well as deployment of new technologies. And they're backing that up with unprecedented levels of funding. You just heard some of that from Dr. Katie Huff. Last fall, the historic $1.2 trillion infrastructure package delivered major investments in our industry. It included the $6 billion for a civil nuclear credit program that supports existing reactors that are at risk of closing. The package doubled down with $2.5 billion towards advanced reactor demonstrations with the goal of deployment before this decade is out. And the bill calls for a large-scale demonstration of carbon-free hydrogen production using nuclear energy. States have harnessed this support in their transition away from coal. 10 years ago, we would have been lucky to see even a dozen pro-nuclear bills moving through state legislatures. And in recent years, we've seen 10 times more action in the states and more than 100 bills supporting nuclear. Earlier this year, West Virginia lifted its legacy ban on new nuclear projects. The state of Indiana passed a law paving the way for SMR deployment. And with support from the state of Tennessee, TVA announced a $200 million program to explore advanced light water designs. Just to show how far the public discussion has come, 4 communities in Wyoming competed to host the first reactor in the state. Let's hear a round of applause for that. These exciting developments, and I could list many more, build on the strength and resilience of our existing fleet. Nuclear already accounts for nearly 20% of the total US generation, and it remains our largest single source of carbon-free electricity. This past year also revealed the potential severity of losing that carbon-free capacity. This should not be a political issue. There are no red states or blue states when it comes to heating homes and keeping businesses running. Take California. At the peak of the pandemic, widespread power outages caused blackouts for hundreds of thousands of residents. And previously, California decided to prematurely shut down the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant. But the lack of a reliable carbon-free replacement has led Governor Newsom to reevaluate that decision to prevent future outages for the good people of California. Last fall, the state of Illinois faced losses of more than twice the amount of clean nuclear electricity than they sourced from wind and solar combined. And thankfully, the General Assembly there voted to preserve its nuclear plants. As a result, their operator filled 650 vacant jobs, and the legislation jump-started more than $300 million in capital projects over the next 5 years. The momentum that we're seeing at the federal and state level is a testament to the value of our existing fleet and our progress on next-generation technology. Sources like wind and solar are also essential. Next-generation reactors are going to pair with them perfectly by providing power when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. And nuclear is also the most efficient option. The US Department of Energy has confirmed that building and operating a nuclear plant uses a fraction of the critical minerals and land that solar and offshore wind do. And when it comes to affordability, nuclear is proven to lower overall system costs for the consumer, period. In fact, NEI just commissioned a study for the experts at Vibrant Clean Energy to explore the role of nuclear energy as part of a low-carbon electricity system. And this new report shows that nuclear has the potential to provide over 40% of US electricity by 2050. A separate scenario with a smaller role for nuclear energy resulted in more than $400 billion in additional costs to consumers over that same time period. If we rely on wind and solar to do the heavy lifting, the system costs are going to be truly prohibitive. And that's according to some research that was done from Stanford University, the Clean Air Task Force, Environmental Defense Fund, and a few other groups. So the upshot is clear. Nuclear is the critical component that actually makes complete decarbonization affordable while keeping our grid reliable. Now, ultimately, what makes the new reactor design so exciting is their even greater flexibility. They open new possibilities for carbon-free energy service at any scale, from the world's largest cities to remote rural communities. They can free communities from diesel and fossil fuels without massive new investments in transmission and distribution. And advanced large designs also are attracting countries like Poland, who've recognized the need to replace their coal-fired stations that really supply nearly 3/4 of their electricity. Poland and other countries are also looking to some of the smaller, simpler designs to meet their energy security and decarbonization needs. And microreactors with power outputs of up to just a few tens of megawatts, they're a great fit for some more isolated regions like Alaska and northern Canada. Reactors in the hundreds of megawatts are a great fit in areas with a larger demand. And just a few weeks ago, NuScale announced a partnership with Romania to build 6 small modular reactors just outside of Bucharest. Most recently, the Tennessee Valley Authority partnered with Canada's Ontario Power Generation to develop and deploy GE Hitachi's SMR design on both sides of our border. And as many of you know, we're continuing to make history right here at home. In Waynesboro, Georgia, Southern Company is completing work on the first commercial reactors built in the United States in more than 3 decades. The Vogtle 3 reactor, which will go online within a year, will be the first AP1000 advanced pressurized water reactor in the nation. Vogtle 3 and 4 will produce more carbon-free electricity than all 7,200 wind turbines in the state of California. When the new reactors are complete, the 4 reactors on site will produce enough carbon-free electricity to power 1 million homes and businesses in Georgia. Pressure on the grid will only increase as a result of future demand. These reactors have the capacity to keep up while offering the flexibility to meet the specific needs of every community. We've evolved beyond talking about if we're going to build the fleet of tomorrow, and we're talking about when and where. But we can't forget about who actually makes this all possible. Generations of electricians and welders and engineers and operators, they built the reactors that we depend on today. Today, our industry employs more than 100,000 people directly, and the supply chain, well, that employs 4 times that much. When we build the reactors of tomorrow, we're going to activate even more segments of the American workforce. You know, a recent report looked specifically at communities transitioning from coal to nuclear. And the report estimated that each small modular reactor sited to replace a retiring coal plant would provide hundreds of on-site jobs. At coal sites, we estimate that up to 75% of the current workforce could transition to work at a nuclear plant. And these jobs, they would exist throughout the 60-plus year life of the plant and pay substantially higher wages. Hundreds of coal plants are scheduled to close in the next several years, but that shouldn't leave local economies behind. When we invest in next-generation reactors, they can utilize the existing coal infrastructure, which avoids the need for new transmission to connect these plants to the grid. Advanced nuclear reactors will be local economic engines. They'll provide quality, secure jobs. They'll bring tax revenue to support schools and libraries and first responders. And they'll do it all without emitting air pollution that could harm people's health. Building these reactors can make the transition to clean energy a just economic transition. And with your help, We're going to make sure that investments in nuclear energy are investments in working people. Nuclear energy's potential for decarbonization goes beyond the electric grid. Entire industries are recognizing nuclear's ability to reduce or erase their carbon footprints. You know, transportation and manufacturing alone make up 45% of our greenhouse gas emissions. The UN has made it clear that these industries need to accelerate their current progress towards their emission targets. That urgency, combined with the technology and tools that we already have, has brought new customers into the fold. Leaders in the oil and gas and chemical manufacturing industries are raising their hands in numbers we've not seen before. At an energy conference in Houston earlier this year, Jim Fitterling, the CEO of Dow Chemical, specifically spoke to how SMRs can help his company achieve its decarbonization goals. Synthos, one of Poland's major synthetic materials producers, is partnering with GE Hitachi to deploy SMRs. And Nucor, a company synonymous with the steelmaking industry, is investing in NuScale to build a future that will require hundreds of smaller reactors across the country. Advanced reactors are the solution that they've been searching for. They can provide the reliable, cost-effective, carbon-free generation needed to decarbonize their supply chains. And they enable manufacturers to sell to companies like Ford and GM and Tesla and others who are committed to a lower carbon future. Looking ahead, we expect to see even more industrial use of nuclear energy. The off-peak capacity of conventional nuclear reactors, it can be used today to generate clean hydrogen for the manufacturing and transportation sectors. New technologies will provide the high-temperature heat needed to decarbonize our heavy industry. And cutting-edge designs offer advancements in size and efficiency, which can revolutionize processes like steelmaking and transportation for ships and aircraft. In a time when we badly need it, we're staring at an unprecedented opportunity to rebuild our leverage in the global supply chain. As the world's leader in nuclear output, we can export our standards along with our technology. Nuclear energy innovation in America, from universities to national labs to the private sector, is fueling the fleet of tomorrow. The choice to build alongside our allies and partners, it's no small decision. Nuclear development forges economic and security relationships that can last 100 years or more. Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine has underscored the link between energy security and national security. As an industry and as a democracy, we stand with Ukraine and our partners across the globe. And that's why we're working with the administration, with Congress, and with our allies to establish a secure and reliable uranium fuel supply that will eliminate the need for Russian imports. I won't sugarcoat the current difficulties. While the decision is simple from a diplomatic and moral standpoint, it won't be easy to execute, and it can't be done overnight. Keeping plants online will require an all-hands-on-deck effort from fuel suppliers, utilities, investors, and others. We need to have the same goal: eliminate dependency on Russian fuel services without sacrificing reliable, affordable, carbon-free power. We also need federal support to reestablish U.S. leadership in fuel conversion and enrichment capabilities. We have the ability to develop a secure fuel supply for the world's nuclear reactors. Nuclear energy provides a necessary level of protection from daily price fluctuations and the whims of foreign dictators and bad actors. Our plants go roughly a year and a half or even longer between refuelings. Right now, European nations in particular are searching for ways to break their dependence on Russian energy. And we've already seen Finland cancel plans for a Russian-built reactor, and the Czech Republic left both Russia and China off their invitation to submit proposals for new plants. The ongoing partnership between Westinghouse and Ukraine in both fuel supply and new builds is a testament to the value of our global partnerships. If we're going to reach our climate goals, we can't sacrifice any of the reliable, secure, independent power that we already have. As license renewals come up, we must do everything we can to keep existing reactors online. And we know that when nuclear plants shut down, carbon-emitting sources like coal and natural gas usually fill the void, driving up emissions. Of course, right now, Germany is shuttering 3 of its nuclear plants and planning to completely phase out the source by the end of the year. Energy prices are soaring. Their deadline to reach net zero emissions is approaching, and yet we're seeing Europe's largest economy revert to fossil fuels. That isn't decarbonizing. It's running in the opposite direction of our climate goals. Thankfully, other countries that were on a similar path are now abruptly changing course. 3 weeks after Russia launched their invasion, a survey commissioned by Citi Research found a 25% increase in support for nuclear among European residents. Belgium has extended the life of their operating plants by a decade. And South Korea and the Netherlands are now committing to build new plants, while the United Kingdom and Czech Republic are increasing their targets for new capacity. France, a country that planned to phase down nuclear, recently announced plans to build up to 14 new plants by 2050. That's the kind of decision-making that we need all over the world. At this point, our challenge isn't a lack of demand. It's being able to build fast enough to keep up with the demand. First, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is going to face a rapidly growing volume of applications for new reactors. If we're going to build them, we need a more efficient process. Regulators must have the capacity to efficiently review and approve licenses and site permits for new designs so that these reactors can come online. And we're not talking about demand for 10 or even 20 reactors. In fact, NEI recently polled chief nuclear officers at our member utilities. Together, they're expecting to add 90 gigawatts of nuclear power to the grid in the United States, the bulk of that coming online by 2050. That translates to about 300 new small modular reactors. Can you imagine 300 new small modular reactors in the next 25 years? That type of production would double US nuclear output today. And it won't all be done with small modular reactors. There'll be various sizes and shapes. But here's the thing. That estimate only includes utilities that already operate nuclear plants. It doesn't include the growing list of utilities who are new to nuclear and demonstrating interest in advanced technologies. Right now, the DOE Loan Programs Office is working on several applications for nuclear projects right here in the US. And the Export-Import Bank is working to mobilize funding for overseas customers who want to do business with us. The overall opportunity is massive. According to one estimate, revenues for US companies alone could be worth up to $1.9 trillion in exports over the next 30 years. That's value we can't afford to miss out on. But we can't afford to wait around for big banks and credit rating agencies who are trying to decide how nuclear fits into the puzzle. Technology tribalism can't be a barrier to our most proven solutions. You know, I began with a vision of the next 30 years. If we're going to achieve that future, we can't wait another year or even the next 6 months to act. And that's what I want our leaders and everyone here today to keep in mind. At COP27, the Clean Energy Ministerial, and every other forum where official critical decisions are being made about our climate and our energy future, we need to be crystal clear. If we don't commit to the next generation of nuclear now, our hesitation will cost our electric grid, our economy, and our environment. The train is leaving the station, and it's time to go all in on nuclear energy. I know we can make it happen. I know we can make it happen if we're together. Thank you very much. I'm now going to step to the side, and I'm going to join Monica Trousey up here on stage, and she's going to facilitate some questions from those of you that are joining us virtually, as well as those of you that are right here in the room. So please use the Slido to put in your questions. Thank you.
Hi, Maria.
Hi, Monica.
Wonderful speech as always. Thank you for your inspiring words.
Absolutely.
It's such an exciting time for our industry.
Oh, I think it's unprecedented, actually.
Yeah. So as Maria indicated, we'll be taking questions from the audience here in the room, and as well for those joining us virtually. Please do follow the instructions on the screen for submitting your questions via Slido. Maria, you talked about the economic opportunities that exist as a result of all the reactors that we know that will be built in the coming years. What are the infrastructure needs to get there?
Well, it's a lot of building, Monica. So we really need to build up the supply chain. When you start thinking about all of the different opportunities that we have, it comes with not only manufacturing capability that we need, it comes with workforce that we need. And on the positive, you know, the United States has a wealth of opportunity. We have fantastic national labs that have been partnering with the private sector to bring some of these new makes and models, if you will, to the marketplace. And on the positive, some of these smaller designs are going to be a little bit more factory constructed. And so that's going to give us an opportunity to get those sort of factories up and running. And so we can build those right here in the United States. So a lot of work to be done, and I know some people kind of shy away from, you know, really, can we build that many reactors? You know, I would just say, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, you know, we brought 100 reactors online for, you know, over 90 gigawatts of power. I'm confident that if we put our mind to it, we can absolutely build the kind of scale that we're talking about here in the United States, as well as support our export market as well.
You know, we've spent a lot of time talking about the next generation of financing for our industry. You talked about 300 plus reactors in this country alone. NEI is, of course, actively engaged in conversations with the financial community about, you know, sort of understanding their thinking on the financing and also offering our perspectives on the exciting opportunities that exist. And we know that a piece of that conversation is around ESG and how nuclear fits into ESG. How important are these screens to securing financing for future projects?
So Monica, they're important. They're important because the financial sector is looking to these ESG screens and sort of whether or not you fit, whether or not you should get credit for being ESG. You know, I'll start with, well, of course nuclear should be getting credit for ESG. And I'd like to tell you that it's that simple. But it's not. And there's some financial institutions that look at nuclear and look at ESG, and they struggle to say that nuclear actually supports it. One example is over in Europe for the EU taxonomy and conversations that are playing out there as to whether or not sort of nuclear fits you know, into the ESG framework. So I think it's really important that we all stand up for nuclear and we talk about the fact that, of course, it should be given ESG credit. And it's important because one of the things we need to unlock, of course, is financial investment. And the financial community is looking to these ESG screens because they want to say, if you give us your money and we invest it for you, you're investing it wisely and we're going for a clean climate. And so we very much want to ensure that nuclear gets the due credit that it deserves.
And we're working on that. So I love this question from the audience because I am not a scientist. The question is, how do we start conversations about nuclear energy with non-scientific audiences?
Well, what a great question. And again, I'm going to point to all of you here in the room. I would say that's all our jobs, right? And the best way to communicate with folks isn't to communicate from your position. It's to communicate from the position of the person that you're talking to. So do a little less talking and a little bit more listening, and try to understand from that person's vantage point what their concerns are, what their issues are, what their perspective of nuclear is, and then build a bridge from where you know that nuclear is today and the potential that nuclear has for tomorrow. It couldn't be more important, because as we talked about the kind of build, doubling potentially the amount of nuclear that we have in the United States today, and even more so around the world, there's a lot of people that need to make sure they understand not only the value of nuclear, but are reassured that it's being done right, that we have high standards for safety. And so it's very important that you connect with individuals, local stakeholders, local policymakers. Please go out of your way to engage.
Another question from Chris S. in the audience. As nuclear advocates, is there a way that we can help to move the needle in the regulatory space to make it easier and faster to license new reactors?
Well, absolutely. Let's just point right here at home, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they have a lot of public meetings, and public meetings means just that. They're open to the public, and I think it's an opportunity to weigh in. I think it's an opportunity to ensure that as a regulator, of course, we want that gold standard, we want that high level of rigor and safety, but we also want it done efficiently. And I think we need to hold the regulator a little bit more accountable on that efficiently part. And in fact, later in our program today, you'll see the chairman of the NRC in a fireside chat with Dan Stoddard. And I hope perhaps that will come out in the conversation, that we get a view from the regulator about how they imagine that we can move forward as quickly as we need to go, safely and efficiently.
So you used to operate a nuclear plant. Can you comment on how feasible you think it is to have coal plant workers transition to jobs at nuclear power?
Absolutely. You know, I often have this conversation when I talk to policymakers, because it's not intuitive that you would think coal versus nuclear, right? They sound so very different. But what I always like to say is, well, in nuclear, you know, we boil water a little bit differently. But after that, it really looks just like a power plant. And so you'd be amazed at the overlap between coal power plant jobs and nuclear power plant jobs. I mean, just think about it, right? Once you've turned it into steam, you're sending it to the turbine, you need mechanics, electricians, instrument and control technicians, you need engineers, you know, very similar talent that we have at plants today. In fact, for those of you that have worked at plants or work at plants even now, think about it, right? During refueling outages, I know we would bring folks down from our coal-fired plants, and they would work with us on our refueling outages. So I would say there's already a natural sort of overlap and synergy with many companies, from the fossil fuel side of the house to the nuclear side. And so by doing it in the way we're talking about, sort of closing down some fossil fuel places, it's a natural for that talent to come to the nuclear energy industry. And we are here with open arms.
Okay, a question from, I think this says Julia. A major barrier to building new commercial nuclear is cost. What is driving these high costs, and what can we do to bring the cost down? We talk about cost a lot.
Yeah, so one of the challenges I know in construction here in the United States is that we just hadn't built in a while. And so when you don't build in a while and the supply chain's not there, you know, you're not going to restart it most cost effectively, most efficiently, you know, right out of the gate. Now let's point to some countries that didn't stop building so much. South Korea is probably a good example of that. They continued building reactors over the 30-year time frame where we were not building so much here in the United States. And they demonstrated that as you continue to build, you get more efficient, you reduce costs. And so I think partly we just need to get on with it. We need to start building. And I think the natural process of improvement will bring the costs down. And I think also as we look at these makes and models, some of which will be smaller, they're going to lend itself to a little bit more of a factory setting. And I think in that more controlled factory setting as well, I think we're going to also have a way to really sort of work out the costs. And then if you talk to many of the reactor vendors, they really thought about cost on the front end. I know that sounds pretty straightforward, but if you think about how we have designed and built nuclear over the many years, really cost was not an upfront item. And so now as folks are looking at it in that way, instead of saying, oh, let me design this very specific nuclear bolt, they were like, well, why do I need a really specific nuclear bolt? Why can't I just get a bolt like other people would use and only need the really specific ones for a definite application that's required? And so they really are taking that cost look up front, and I think we're going to really see the benefits of that.
All right, we have time for the shortest final question, and I'm going to choose the one with the most upvotes. How is the public support for nuclear technology trending?
So interesting. I would say here in the United States, we are about maybe 60% or so right now favorable for nuclear. And I really don't like this statistic. It's actually lower for women. And so I think one area that we really have to embrace, and we have groups like NAYGN as well as WIN, I think we have some opportunities to really connect with the women to better understand why that seems to be, you know, a lower amount than it is for the broader population. But also I would point out that the younger generation is more positive towards nuclear. And I think nuclear looks to them like a new technology or high tech. And I think the younger generation's really excited more with high tech. So I think we really have a very positive base forming. So we have a solid one to start with. And I think as we bring some of these new plants and build these pilot projects to give people a view of nuclear now and nuclear going forward, I think that's going to bring a couple more into the fold.
Maybe more than a couple.
Maybe more than a couple.
All right, thank you so much, Maria. It's always fun to be on stage with you. And I know you're going to introduce our next guest. Thank you.
Thank you.